All right, this is another episode of Sorry for Rambling. I'm Alex Kack, and today we have Jen Perelman running for Congress down in Florida's 23rd district against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Jen, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
I didn't butcher your last name, though, right? Did I get it
No,
right?
you said it right. You said it. You said it right.
Awesome. Let's jump in. You are running as a Democrat. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. I'm challenging Debbie Wasserman Schultz in the primary.
All right. Let's start off. Why are you running against her? You know,
Well, Debbie has been my congressional representative for about 16 years now. And before that, she was my Florida state legislator. So I'm very familiar with her. And over the years, she has obviously been taking increasingly more and more money from corporate donors, special interests, and is not doing what the majority of our district wants her to do in terms of policy. So I've been watching this as a constituent. And I have the background where I feel like I'm capable to offer this, and I do see it as a term of service. And it's just one more thing that I'm doing as an activist to get the money out of politics is basically just putting my own self out there because it's just we need to get the money out.
and I think that's absolutely the right approach to these things. Uh, what do you say when? Because I think there's this kind of line of thought that even if Democratic voters are unhappy with a representative, sometimes they think a primary challenge is off limits. They think it's not okay, that you're harming the party or you're harming the chances of in the general or even around the state. It kind of radiates out. What do you say to people who say things like that?
I generally just tell people that this is not personal, right? We're just trying to have a democracy. And in the Democratic Party, of which I have been affiliated for more than 30 years now. So, I've been a part of this party from when it actually was a Labor Party. And in fact, it should be the Labor Party. It's supposed to be the left party, and the Republican Party is the corporate right party. And we've watched this metamorphosis over the past 40 years so that what we have is a right-wing party and then a center-right Democratic corporate party. So I understand that they do not like challenges to their incumbents. And I understand that from the establishment perspective, they see that as very threatening. They do not want people coming in that are not on the corporate payroll. And as far as how the constituents react, it's mostly talking points that they get from the establishment in terms of you're going against the party, or why don't you run for something where there's a Republican in the seat and try to do that, do it that way. And I really just think we need to understand that the red blue dichotomy is just no longer accurate. Okay, that's just not representative of what these groups are actually about. What they're about is corporations, corporate donors, and interests that are contrary to interests of regular people. So, I generally find that when I bring up issues and I explain to people, well, look, these are things that aren't even radical. Medicare for all is not radical. Every other country has this. It's almost like these people are waking up out of a stupor that they didn't realize that they were ever entitled to anything. But when you put that out there and they can see an actual distinction between a progressive challenger and an incumbent, the majority of people are very receptive to it. And you will always have the holdouts that are very party loyal. They only care about the party. And, to them, I say, we still are the party. In fact, we're what the party is supposed to be in the first place. So, it depends on who I'm talking to. But for the most part, people are receptive to, especially to a challenger to Debbie.
It's an interesting thing. I think the dynamic that's developed within the Democratic Party in relation to these primaries. Sometimes, you used a word there, establishment, and to me that seemed like a very common sense type of language for progressives to use. And then I ran into something really odd in my interactions online with people, where there were voters, kind of people that were centrists or kind of center left, more political moderates inside the party, who saw that anger in that language directed at them. and thought that these candidates were specifically talking about them as part of the establishment because they might have voted, for Bill Clinton in the primary in '92 or something like this. What do you do to reach out to voters like that, or to explain to them that, hey, you're still part of the working class, you're not really part of the problem?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I have going for me in that regard is that I am in the same peer group as a lot of those people that we are generally referring to when we say things like establishment or even neoliberal. And I own that I was in that. I actually voted for Bill Clinton twice. I voted for Barack Obama twice. So if anybody is what we would be considering establishment, it would be me. So I find that when I come across people that are essentially my peers, it's a lot easier for them to reckon these things with someone who was there, as opposed to maybe say someone who's 25 years old or just out of school and telling them, hey, you guys are just old and you don't know what you're talking about. I think that it resonates more coming from one of their own colleagues, their peers. So, it's the reality is that there is an establishment of how things have been done, and we need to change that paradigm. We need to own it. We need to own our accountability in creating it. Like I said, my votes in the past, in retrospect, were probably not ideal. And now that we know what we've done wrong, we need to work on doing what we can do to make it right.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the whole nature of democracy, right? Especially, I think, of democracy with inside a private entity like a political party, is it's not a static thing. And what, at least from my perspective, I think what might have been the correct vote or the correct ideology to take in one election cycle, 4, 8, 20 years later, it might have been a stepping stone, or it might be something completely different. I think that's a very healthy part of it. You are part of this kind of whole wave we're seeing around the country of progressive challengers to sitting incumbents. I mean, do you have a relationship with some of these other candidates? If so, what's that like?
Yeah, I am a candidate for brand new Congress. So I am on the BNC slate. And I consider all of those people my slate mates, was what we call ourselves, slate mates. And a bunch of them I have met in person, and there is definitely a feeling of camaraderie and support that we get from each other all the time. I mean, when this pandemic hit and we were all shut down from canvassing, we had a complete candidate meeting of brainstorming and ideas and how to transition campaigns to virtual canvassing, essentially. So it's been an amazing support network to have those people. And even the progressives that I am familiar with, like Shahid Buttar, the people that are not BNC people that are fellow progressives, I consider them my fellow progressives. These are people that are in this with me. And we just all sort of have this understanding that the more of us that get in, the more we're looking forward to working with each other and just really trying to turn things around.
Do you view yourself and the kind of broader progressive movement as something outside of or separate from the rest of the Democratic Party, or just simply part of kind of a larger democratic ecosystem that's just advocating for certain values within it?
That's a hard question because it's changed so much. Like I said, I mean, I was a Democrat when I registered to vote, and I've never been affiliated with another political party. And so to me, it's what I grew up. My parents were Democrats, and it was the party of regular people. It was the party of labor. We were the environment party. We were the anti-war party. And so for those people that are part of that original mindset of what is a Democrat, to us, we are still Democrats. Now, we are often viewed from that center, right group that are not really in line with democratic values. They view us as outsiders when, in fact, my values haven't changed. I've always been pro-labor, pro-environment, and anti-war. This hasn't changed. So the fact that now that's considered so progressive and outside the norm, that's something that should make people stop and think how that happened. because it really isn't. It's not like they were this settled party and then me and a group of other radicals came and tried to infiltrate. I've been here the whole time as well. And I have noticed the corporate takeover of my own party. And it's unfortunate that it has to be seen in somewhat adversarial terms. But I guess it might have to be at this point, because when I have to argue with Democrats that healthcare is a human right, that's incredibly frustrating to me. I mean, I expect to argue about that with somebody at a Republican meeting. But when you're arguing about human rights, otherwise known as working class issues, that should be the foregone conclusion in my Democratic Party. So I see myself as very much part of the Democratic Party. I see my values as completely in line with Democratic Party values. And really, the people that have been sitting here so long, as it's shifted, they might want to stop and check their values. That's what I think. I think that I am perfectly within the party values that I think of as democratic.
And I think that's an important point to reiterate sometimes to voters who might be within the party but who are more moderate. Is I know that there is like a hostility that has brewed towards progressives, frankly, and some of it, a lot of it, has less to do with the policies and less to do with the candidates than it does with some of the supporters. You know, when you encounter, and let's be honest, the profile of progressive supporter who tends to kind of be a little more vitriolic tends to look more like me than, frankly, a lot of the progressive candidates. They tend to be younger, they tend to be white, they tend to be men. What do you say to these people who might be supportive of you or of your slate mates or presidential candidates that you're supportive of, but whose behavior might be alienating to a substantial portion of the party that you want to represent on the ballot?
Well, I would say the same thing that I would say to every side in this. You know, we need to look past the personalities and our personal feelings being hurt and look at the policies that are really important for us as a collective. And that is one of the biggest problems I notice about what I call establishment Democrats, is they are more concerned about their feelings being hurt and about what feels good to them than what is actually happening in terms of policy. And I've been noticing this since 16. So their issue, like you said, their issues aren't policy. Well, that should be the issues. So that is why we're in the mess that we're in, is they're literally playing personality politics and identity politics, and they're not worrying about what the issues are. And while the people that are more towards the center tend to refer to people on the left as, you know, more hostile or angry or Bernie bros, on the one hand, I feel like saying, yeah, we should be angry. We don't even have healthcare like every other country in the developed world. We have a lot to be angry about. The bigger question is, why aren't more people angry? But that aside, I urge everybody, vote on policy. Look at what somebody wants to implement that is going to make the lives better of everybody in this collective. Don't worry so much if people use phrases and terms that are politically incorrect and if it hurts your feelings and all the, you know, at the end of the day, that stuff is just not relevant. And so I really think that the more we switch the dialogue to policy and not politics, that we're better off. And I say that to both sides. It's like, just be nice and realize that we are all stuck in this together, whether we like each other or not. So the best thing to do is come up with policies that work for the best interest of the majority of our collective. That's just common sense. So, you know, I urge people to get out of their, you know, he said, she said, ridiculous name calling, labeling, all these things that I do feel like media and corporate America are using to keep us divided. I feel like those messages being permeated in mainstream media about the Bernie bros versus this versus that, that is all designed to keep us fighting amongst ourselves while the 1% gets richer and we're just chasing our tails. So we need to look at policy and not whether or not we happen to personally like somebody.
Well, I think that is obviously valid. And I mean, ideally, we'd all be voting on policies that we agree with. But it is an unfortunate side of it. I mean, you know, there's this kind of online social media war that's raging. And it is incredibly toxic, and it's incredibly detrimental, I think, to any Democrat getting elected, because it's split the party not even just into two sides, but into lots of little confrontational groups within those that are and some of it is just kind of what you would see in any primary historically, labels being thrown around. And I think people can kind of get past that. But some of it has escalated so far and become so hyperbolic, where people are threatening each other. And, what can candidates, what can political leaders, what can, people who are looking to lead, what can they do to change this culture that's developed? And do you think it's important for leaders to take a role in changing that culture?
I think that, our responsibility is to just the well-being of everybody in general. And when you think of that, then you realize that the infighting is actually counter to what is in our best interest. So I do think it's incumbent upon leaders to recognize infighting and really try to pull people back into, let's really look at what the problem is here, stop fighting amongst ourselves. I mean, I do think that. But I don't necessarily think that political leaders need to be accountable for the actions and behaviors of their supporters. I mean, that's unreasonable. I remember, David Duke endorsed Tulsi Gabbard. Okay. That doesn't mean that she supports the Klan, right? I mean, so we're not responsible for what our supporters do, but I do think that we have a responsibility to promote policy messages that unite people more than divide them. And when you talk policy, you do unite people more than you divide people. When you talk about Medicare for all, and that 72% of the Democratic Party wants Medicare for all, it's more than half the country totally, forget, even including Republicans. So there are so many things that unite us. And I do think that as a candidate and as representatives, there is a responsibility to keep bringing people back to those discussions. And inherently, we will find unity in those discussions, because Medicare for all, living wage, our outsourcing trade deals, these are the kinds of things that we're all really coming to, to deal with right now in this pandemic, that we're all going to agree would probably be better for the collective going forward. So I think the more we focus on issues, the more people are going to realize that we have more in common, or at least we can distract them from their petty nonsense by talking about issues.
And I think that's absolutely the right thing right there. And yeah, I mean, it is absolutely absurd, to at least to some degree, to penalize or hold against, I think, a political figure, the loudest or most insane of their supporters, because these are not their friends, these are not their colleagues, these are not their staff, and it's different when it's someone that's maybe in an inner circle or someone that's directly affiliated with a candidate. Then there might be some type of argument to make for like a guilty by association thing. But when you're talking about a random voter, there's never been any candidate for any position from any party in history who hasn't had at least one unhinged voter. That's just, as a cross-section of the population, it's impossible. When you talk about policies, Medicare for all, I think, is one of the ones that I heard and seen from you that you seem to be the most supportive of. Is that correct? You're a single-payer healthcare system?
Yes. To me, that is my top priority. I think I can't think of a single better thing that would better the lives of the majority of people in a quicker amount of time than a single payer healthcare system. The fact that we don't have this, and we're really reaping that right now with this pandemic, but the fact that we don't have this is embarrassing. And instead of people sitting there and asking how we're going to pay for it, and, why are they not recognizing that this is not even that radical, right? It's not radical. Every other developed nation has Medicare for all, but it literally will save the most lives of the people in this country. And on top of that, on top of just the literally getting healthcare right? The stress for people of not being able to afford healthcare, the stress of having to decide between food and medicine or having to ration your insulin or all of those things, the psychological toll that that level of stress puts on our people is, I don't even think we can measure it. I think that Medicare for All is one of those things that would just silently save more lives just from the peace of mind for people not having to be stressed out about paying their health care. So to me, it's the biggest bang for the buck policy wise. So that is, I mean, that's the main reason I prioritize it. And because there's already a really good piece of legislation from Pramila Jayapal that is sitting there and just waiting for more people to come in and sign it. So it's kind of like, it's good to go. We're good to go on that. And we need to.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. You know, I mean, personally, single payer healthcare has always been, I mean, healthcare period has always been the biggest issue for me. And you know, there was large periods of my life from childhood till now, but I've gone uninsured and I've seen firsthand how destructive it can be. It is one of the great moral failings, I think, of our nation. And it's also been something, frankly, that we have had, you know, presidents and political leaders trying to pursue for over 100 years in this country now, which is something that I think is often forgotten in the conversations that happen. You know, and we look at the pivot in the Democratic Party away from a single payer system. Going back to you know, your vote with Clinton in '92, he never went out there and said, I don't support a single payer system at that time. He campaigned that he supported universal health care and just figuring out a way to get there, which is, I mean, obviously didn't happen. And there was the Hillary Care kind of fiasco to try to cobble together some other system, something that might be consensus with Republicans. But that does bring, I think, a separate question that a lot of moderate voters get concerned about, which is the idea of purity and you know, what can you actually get past? You know, and so let's say you win, you take this seat, and let's say that Medicare for All doesn't get the votes it needs, but in that process, a new bill is negotiated that, you know, creates a Medicare expansion and a single payer system, or not a single payer system, but a public option addendum. I mean, are you voting for that? Are you voting for any healthcare expansion up to single payer, or are you, my only votes are for single payer and everything else is bunk?
No, I will only advocate and fight for single payer. However, you know, there are going to be things that come up where you have to act in the best interest of your constituents. And really, that would be one of those things where I would rather take the pulse of everybody in my constituency and say, what do you know, is this something we want? But the decision I would make on any piece of legislation regarding anything will be based on as much information as I can garner from the people I represent as to what they think. And it would never be based on my personal opinion or the opinions of my corporate donors. So I can't always say, okay, I would do this or I wouldn't do that. My votes would be strictly in the best interest of what my constituents want. And when you go with that in mind, yeah, there could be compromised legislation that comes up where you're getting a huge Medicaid expansion, or and yeah, that would probably be what people would want to support. So I would vote for the things my constituents would want me to do, but that's not something that I would be a proponent of. To me, it really philosophically is an all or nothing proposition. And either we believe healthcare is a human right, or we do not. And that it's very simple. And they can call it a purity test, or they can call it a litmus test. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But are we a society that finds healthcare to be a human right? And I will not stop fighting for that to be the case. So if you want to call me a purist or, you know, whatever, that's fine. But I believe healthcare is a human right so long as we're in a society that can provide it, which we are. So there is no reason that we don't have that other than greed. And that is an inexcusable reason for people to not be having healthcare. It would be one thing if we didn't have the resources. That would be, okay, well, you know, you can only do what you have. But for us to have what we have and for people to not be able to get it because somebody profits from that is despicable. And we should be ashamed of that.
mean, I couldn't agree more. Let's pivot to a little bit about you. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, you thought that you were kind of specifically qualified for this race. What is your background? I mean, personally and professionally. I mean, what's your story?
So I am a second generation native Jew to North Miami Beach, Florida. So I grew up in the second largest Jewish ghetto per capita outside of Brooklyn in the country. I went to a very, I wouldn't say affluent public high school, but there was definitely a certain amount of wealth and resources. And I grew up in an area of people that were predominantly educated and privileged. I was fortunate to have that opportunity. My parents are very working class. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So I was raised with very working class values, even though I've never wanted for anything. I don't know what it's like to be food insecure, and I don't know what it's like to not have health insurance. So I somewhat grew up in a bubble that way. My educational background is I went to college for journalism, and I used to want to do investigative reporting. Yeah, I was going to be the next Woodward and Bernstein. And then I ended up getting into advertising and realized, that side of it. I did go in advertising. And then I was doing media relations for the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. And I realized that I really wanted to get into lobbying. Oh, and I skipped that I do have a master's in marketing. So from there, I was doing media relations, setting up press conferences. I was always at the legislature. I was doing meetings in the governor's office, and I was really understanding how policy works. And I decided I wanted to go to law school from there. And that's when I went to law school. And from law school, I've done everything from criminal defense to corporate litigation to condo and HOA covenant enforcement litigation. So a pretty wide variety. I do like criminal the best. I do like criminal defense. I am a very big advocate for criminal justice. But so the gist of my background is journalism, marketing, and law, with experience working for lobbying organization in terms of understanding how policy gets written and policy gets argued and passed. And so that's what I meant when I said I kind of have a background that is definitely conducive to this type of position.
You've done a little bit of everything, which is honestly really impressive. You're highly educated, a lot of important positions. How do these disparate kind of threads from marketing to law, how do they inform you as a person and as a candidate?
Well, my journalism background is it's funny, at the root of everything, and I still find this to this day, at the root of everything, I still feel like at heart I'm a journalist. So even when I'm doing interviews, I mean, unless I'm talking to someone like Max Blumenthal, who's actually really a journalist, and then I just feel kind of dumb. But like in my core, I'm a journalist, and I'm going to question everything. I'm going to check everything. I'm going to research everything. I try to be as reasonable as possible. I try to wait to have facts before making decisions. So that is kind of this basis of who I am, is sort of like acquiring factual information. And then you put on top of that the law part, and there's this element of justice as well. So that to me is very important, to use those things. The marketing is really coming in helpful for campaigning. So there's certain things that I'm able to know about or do as a candidate that a lot of candidates might not realize, because they don't know about marketing. They might not have ever done a marketing campaign or a public relations campaign or written a press release or things like that. So my background in that is, I think, very helpful in the campaign aspect of it. But, I've done a lot of things. I think I've got like one foot in the establishment privileged world and one foot in this sort of working class world of people who are disenfranchised. And those are actually people that with whom I feel really comfortable. I spend a lot of time doing community service. I spend a lot of time working in disenfranchised communities. And I really see both worlds. And I think that is extremely beneficial to me, to be able to reach both sides of those constituents. I mean, we have a pretty diverse district. So it's really good to be able to know kind of where everybody is coming from.
It is It is obvious. I mean, it's a diverse area, as you said, and what do you find? And this is a very vague question, but a very softball one. But I think it's important. What do you find so special about the state of Florida, about your district in general? I mean, what drives you to want to represent that area that's unique to that area?
Okay, I wouldn't necessarily say there's anything so special. I mean, Florida is generally in the news for the worst reasons, not the best reasons. We are one of the most archaic states in terms of laws. We still have closed primaries, which go back to, post 15th Amendment, trying to keep people of color from voting. We still have those types of laws on our books. So Florida is, in a lot of ways, very backwards. But then down here in South Florida, you also have this very sort of more progressive element of people, in a sense that you have a lot of transients from other places, not just other countries, other cities. A lot of people come here. There's a lot of very affluent people here. There's a lot of various nationalities of people here. I mean, it is very, very diverse. And I think the thing that it's not so much that what makes us special is just that this is where I'm from. I was born here. My family is, for the most part, still all in Florida. So I really don't know, where else I would feel more comfortable representing. But I really feel like being from here gives me a very good perspective on who is here, because I've been watching it over the years, and the shift in our demographics and the change in people that are coming here. And in some ways it's a benefit because we have such diversity, but in some ways it's a negative because we do not have a certain type of hometown camaraderie that a lot of places have. And it's one of those things that I've always found somewhat missing from Florida. But we are, I am here, so this is who I represent. And we are also like the epicenter of climate crisis. So one of the things that's very unique to us is that we're going to be like the first people to be underwater. So, that is something that should be a top priority for our entire congressional delegation down here, and yet it isn't at all.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. And we'll leave it with just kind of one last question here. Both as a politician and just as a person, I mean, what is it ultimately, if you had to summarize it, what is it that you hope to convey? What is? First
of all, I am not a politician, and I actually reject that even as a thing. That shouldn't be a thing. That is actually what I would like to convey. I want to convey that to the people that are sitting there now and anybody running for office. Being a politician, that shouldn't be a thing. That's not a thing. This isn't a career. It's a term of public service. The fact that my representative has never done anything else, she came right out of school and went right into the Florida State House. She has never had another job. This is literally the career. That's unacceptable. This isn't meant to be a career. It's meant to be a term of public service. So that's the first biggest message that I want to convey. So I'm not a politician. I'm just a regular person. I don't have a stump speech. I don't have canned anything. And it works because I just tell the truth. So I don't have to worry about what I said because I just tell the truth. So I don't have to remember who knows what. It's very easy that way. But the other big thing about my campaign, other than we're a service campaign. I started something called Gen Corps, and all my volunteers, prior to this being shut down, we do community service as well as canvassing. So we're serving the community, showing them this is what your congressional representative is supposed to do. So I'm just doing the job. But the key thing about my campaign is about justice and addressing the income and wealth inequality. All of our policies, everything that it all comes down to justice, social justice, economic justice, environmental justice. It isn't about fairness. Life isn't fair. People are born in different circumstances and not everybody gets the same benefits as everyone else. I get it. But the best we can do is be just. So, that's really the goal of my campaign, and what I'm trying to achieve legislatively is narrowing the gap and raising our floor so that the least among us live with dignity. That's all. Jeff Bezos can be as rich as he wants to be. I don't care if he's flying around on a gold-plated jet. That's fine. But he needs to be paying his employees fairly. They need to be getting health care. They shouldn't have to be working 3 jobs. He needs to be paying his taxes, and he can't be screwing the environment. You can do all those things. I think you should be as rich as you want. And I don't have a problem with that. So, I mean, that's really the gist of what I'm doing. I'm not concerned with how high the high is. I'm concerned with how we treat the people on the bottom. And our social safety net is at this point non-existent. And it is not okay how we treat the most oppressed among us. It's just not.
It's an excellent answer. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. And best of luck best of luck with the campaign. And please,
can we tell people to check out the website?
Absolutely. Plug everything.
Okay, so we need money, obviously. We ask for $23 a month for District 23 at gen2020.com, which is Gen with one N, 2020.com. We need people to follow us on social media. Liking, retweeting is the best thing that you can do for us to help from far away. My Twitter handle is Gen with one N, FL23. And on Instagram, we're at Jen Perelman for Congress. And we need help. And also people anywhere in the country, you guys can volunteer to phone bank for me from the comfort of your own home. And so at gen2020.com, please volunteer to help us phone bank. And we're also big on reminding everyone to request.
Florida 23's next Congresswoman, Jen Perelman. Thank you so much for joining us. And please, Jen, stay safe in this time.
Thank you so much. You too. Bye.
Take care.